And in today's video, we're going to go over some common issues with sump pumps and how to troubleshoot them. Now, the issue I'm having is that the pump will fill up with water. I can hear the pump cycling, but it's not actually pushing any water out. Now, I've actually drained this just because I had to get some of the water out and to be able to actually troubleshoot this. But that's the issue I'm having. We're going to go over a couple other things that might be an issue as well. So stick around. Now, before we go to all the effort of pulling the pump and actually disconnecting the line, let's go and see if there's anything else we can troubleshoot first, just visually looking at it, because you might be able to save yourself some time and not actually pull this out, and maybe it's an issue somewhere else. Now, as I was saying earlier, when the pit fills up with water, I can actually hear the pump cycling. So I don't think power is one of my issues, but one of the most common issues I've seen is that, again, maybe you'll lose power to your battery backup. So it's always a good idea to just make sure you have power, go check your circuit breakers and make sure nothing's been tripped. Make sure your battery backup has power. Maybe your battery's gone bad. You just want to check and make sure you actually have power going to the pumps, because that is a common issue. Now, another common issue you'll see is that the float switch gets stuck. In my situation, I actually have two pumps down here. It's really hard to see down here, so I'm just going to show you with the top one. Now, an easy way to kind of look at this without actually pulling this out right now, just look and make sure you got nothing, no debris, anything that would block this switch from coming up. Make sure it's not stuck on the side of your pit, or maybe there's a cord wrapped around it, and then just make sure you can pull it up and down. That's a good way to kind of test it. When you pull it up, you should hear the pump go, but if it's not plugged in, maybe you might not hear that. So that's something you want to check for. That'll give you a good idea if maybe it's actually the float switch, or maybe the pump is bad. But that's something you can kind of look for. Another thing to check is your discharge line. A lot of times what I like to do is just remove this. That way we know it's not going to be anything from here out. That doesn't mean we don't have an issue here. There could be something in here. You can visually inspect that. Look inside there, see if you see anything. If you have a coagulated pipe, one thing you can do, just put a hose in one end, turn it on, and just make sure it's free, and you can see water coming out the other end. But that's another issue you might run into. Like I said, when I'm testing, when I'm trying to work on something, I want to remove everything I possibly can. So I'm just going to remove this for right now, and I'll put it back on later once I figure out what's actually going on with the pump. All right, so now that we've done our visual inspection, we don't see anything that sticks out, and we know we've got power. It's not our discharge hose. We've taken all that out of the picture. Well, let's go ahead and remove our pump. Now, this has what's called a no hub on here, and that's probably because my check valve is actually down in the pit. You will see that occasionally. A lot of times you're just going to see the check valve somewhere vertically on your tubing going out, and that's where you're going to disconnect it. So it's going to be like this. It's going to have a couple band clamps on it. A 5/16 socket it'll loosen those right up, and you can remove that check valve. We'll show you how to test that as well. But for right now, let's go ahead and get this removed. Like I said, this is a no hub. There's no actual check valve here. I think it's down in the pit farther, but let's go ahead and get this removed. Now, the first thing we want to do before we actually pull this out of the pit, we need to make sure we shut our power off. So usually that just means disconnect it, unplug it, whatever you need to do. If it's hardwired for some reason, which I doubt it's going to be, you'll have to shut it off the breaker, but otherwise just disconnect the power. Now, the first thing I want to look at here is my check valve. So I need to disconnect that, and I can do that just by disconnecting this and down here. Now, if this check valve isn't working, that's going to cause the pump to keep cycling. So anytime it shoots up water, that check valve is not going to close, and that water is just going to come back down, and it's going to make the pump work harder than it needs to and possibly burn out. So we want to make sure that check valve is actually working as it should be. So let's get that off. So now, as you can see, it's been a while since that's been removed, so it might be kind of difficult to get that off there. So go ahead, you might have to. Now, the check valve is kind of hard to see, but you can see down in there, there's a flapper. So basically that when the water's pumped out, it'll open, and then any water that's left in the tube will push down on that and it'll close. Now, what you should be able to do is just put a screwdriver or something in there and just make sure it closes. Now, this one is not closing, so we want to see if we can figure out why it's not closing. Before we just go and replace it, just make sure there's no debris, anything else like that in there. It may be tough to see, but there's a rock stuck in there, and I need to get that out. That's probably causing part of our issue. Now, even the rock in there may not be my only issue. This still shouldn't stop the sump pump from working. It's just not going to allow it to be efficient. Now, if it won't open either, that would be a problem. This one does look like it opens. It's just that rock down there wouldn't let it close. So it shouldn't be too hard to remove the rock. So let's get that removed, and then we'll kind of keep troubleshooting a little bit more. Because like I said, I don't think that's going to be my only issue here. Now, we don't want to move it down into the pump. So if you can flip it over, kind of dump it out, that's the best way to go. Okay, I got the rock out. Looks like it's closing properly now. All right, so the next thing we want to check here is our impeller. Let's flip this over. And I do see we got a rock stuck in here again. So otherwise, like I said, I don't see any major debris down there or anything like that. So that shouldn't be an issue there. Now we can check our float here. And that looks like it's definitely moving freely. It's not stuck on anything. And again, it's not plugged in, so we're not going to hear it click the pump on. But we just want to make sure that's working as well. Now, the other thing we want to look for along here is a weep hole. Now, that's going to stop airlock from happening. Now, I've looked all around this pipe, and I do not see one, but I do see a air release hole in the actual sump pump, which is fine in most cases. But this can get filled with sediment and stuff over time. It can get blocked. So I think it's also a good idea to have one right in here as well. So I'm going to put one there. And that actually kind of makes sense with what my issue was. That I could hear the pump running, but it wasn't forcing any water out. Basically, essentially a bubble gets created between the check valve. So any water that gets sucked in actually doesn't go up the tube because of that air bubble. And that weep hole is going to let that air bubble release. So like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and drill a weep hole in here as well. And I'll show you how to do that. Now, for the most part, adding a weep hole is pretty easy. We want it between the check valve and kind of the pump. So basically, I don't have a lot of room here, so I'm going to have to put it in here. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to angle it up because I want any excess water, because it will shoot water out. I want it shot downward into the pit. Otherwise, if I angle it down like this, it's going to shoot the water up and possibly out of the pit, and I definitely don't want that. So we're just going to take an 1/8 inch drill bit here, and we're just going to drill this out. Now, it's always a good idea to start straight and then angle it. There you go. And it's pretty easy. And there you go. And now you've got your weep hole in there. So we'll put everything back together, and we'll put it back in the pit and test it out. And make sure your switch and everything else, nothing's impeding anything as well. And then we'll go ahead and plug everything back in. If you have a battery backup, make sure you plug that in as well. All right, so it does look like everything is now working as it should be. My thoughts are there was some airlock, so that weep hole fixed the issue. Unfortunately, the one in the sump pump doesn't always fix the problem, but whatever it was, we did resolve the issue. It might have been some of that rocks and debris too. But it looks like it's working now as it should be. So as always, thanks for watching, and give us a thumbs up, and we'll catch you on the next one.